Rome for allowing us to do this. This has been wonderful. I'm Philippe de Lyon. We're going to be talking tonight about the courtiers, who they were, what they did, and how they did it. But we're going to amend that just a little bit. We're mainly going to talk tonight about who they were and what they did. After teaching, this is the second time I've given this class. The first time we had some technical issues and a lot of people weren't able to take it, so I'm repeating it. But I'm also cutting the class down a little bit. We ran into just too much information and not enough time. So we're going to talk today about the courtiers, about how they fit into the society, and three different models, all three different and sometimes conflicting models of who the courtiers were and what they did. We're going to get started in just a moment, but I wanted to give two disclaimers. First of all, again, this is a repeat of the class that I gave 2 weeks ago. So if you've already taken that class, you're probably not going to see new material here. I am going to put on the schedule another class, probably in another couple of weeks. That'll be the second part to this class, which is what it meant to be a courtier, what you were supposed to do, how they behaved, and what the purpose was. So, and what their benefit was to them personally. So we're cutting that off to a second part of this class. I can't see the chat the way I have this set up. So if you have a question, just unmute and feel free to ask it, and we'll go from there, okay? So the courtiers, the definition of a courtier, according to, and I always start with my favorite Wikipedia because it's a great place to launch and jump off from. They give you some nice generic information. But basically, a courtier is anyone who attended court of a noble. It could have been a king, it could have been a prince. In the case of the Italians, a lot of times it was dukes. And these were the place where business and legal decisions and political decisions were being done. And so being a courtier at court put you in a position of where decisions were being made, influential people were, and things that would impact your life and other people's lives. The courtiers was not just for the nobility, though. You've got the nobles, such as the kings, the princes, the counts, the dukes, but then you also had lesser nobility, and the gentry had their own courts. And it was not uncommon for barons and baronesses to have, they would hold courts and they would make decisions and legal. They had people who were operating their government. They had people who were their friends. They had people who were there to influence them in behalf of their own families and their own benefits. So the courtiers vary greatly on who you are talking about as a courtier, but it happened at all levels of society. A lot of times your courtiers would be nobles that had business at court. They could be lesser nobles who were in a position of, in a physical position for the nobility. The king had gentlemen of the chambers, cupbearers. He had people who were in paid positions that were to attend to him on a regular basis. And a lot of them would be lesser nobility, or armigerius, who weren't noble at all. And then you also have the people who ran the government. You had the clerks, you had the registrars, you had the people who were in attendance to the clerks, so the people who were helping the clerks and their underlings. You also had the courtiers to the duke or the courtiers to the baron who is at court attending the king. So it's a very large, elaborate setup where one courtier to the king, who may have been a duke, may have had 3 or 4 people in attendance on him, who each had 3 or 4 people in attendance on them on down the line. So it would be a huge household when you were traveling. Okay. What the courtiers got out of this, and they got a lot. They got access to the people who were making decisions, and that was huge. And we'll talk about why that's so important here in just a minute. They had access to the people who were making the legal decisions, not just the nobility, but then the courts, the clerks, the magistrates. All of them were there as well, so that you had access to the people making decisions that would influence you. There's also some monetary side benefits to it, where the courtier would have would get, some courtiers would have paid positions, such as the gentleman of the chamber for Henry VIII. But then you also had people who were um, were being paid not in money, but in benefits, staying with the noble, living in the noble's household, being given hand-me-downs from the noble, being given gifts. All of these were support, and a lot of the courtiers did support themselves. The courtiers also included artisans, painters, sculptors, people doing drawing. It was a way for them to enhance the art, and it was a way for that person to enhance the noble. And so it was mutually beneficial, and oftentimes they would not pay them for their art, but give them things in return for the art, and were often quite generous. Okay, so I kind of rambled on there, and I'm really bad about rambling, so if I start repeating myself, somebody should step in and say, hey. Does anybody have any questions about who the courtiers were, and a little bit about what they got out of it, why they would fill these positions? Okay, then let's talk a little bit about why. One of the concepts in the Middle Ages, and this is true all the way up through the Renaissance. The Renaissance is where this started changing, and this is the concept of the great chain of being. I'm going to read you a quote. This is from the Renaissance by Cooney. Among the importance of continuities with the classical period was the concept of the great chain of being. Its major premise was that every existing thing in the universe had its place in a divinely planned hierarchical order, which was pictured as a chain vertically extended. So the great chain of being, the concept is that everybody had a place on this chain, from their majesties towards the top, and the great chain of being started with God holding the top of the chain, and then had all of the angels and saints on that chain, then the royalty, the queen, king, and then going on down with the nobilities, everybody ranked in order and in precedence. Including underneath the people would be the animals, and ending with the earth. And the earth is attached to the bottom of the chain. It wasn't a lake. It's what held up the earth and supported it. And the concept was that every link on this chain was important, that destroying any link of it would crash the world. And so it was not only important for the queen to be followed and listened to, because she was imperative for the protection of the world, but so was the lowest of her subjects. And these spaces are fixed. They are unmovable. Once you're in your spot, that's where you belong. So the concept of the courtier is that through me giving service to someone above my station, I can enhance my own position and raise my status without changing my place in the great chain of being, but I can enhance my status through prestige and privilege and financial benefits by attaching myself to the services of this greater person. It is important that this concept of the great chain of being was changing, and the courtiers was actively attempting to change this by raising their station. It becomes even more prevalent later in the 16th century, and by the 17th century, this is no longer the overriding concept. As soon as in the 16th century you have a sitting queen being beheaded, it opens up the rein that says everything else is changeable. That great chain is no longer locked and irrefutable. So the whole point of the courtier was advancing themselves and sometimes their family, sometimes just themselves, through service to another to somebody of a higher status and a higher station than they were. You would see dukes and counts attaching themselves to the king. You would see barons and lesser sons who weren't in line for inheriting titles attaching themselves to the nobility as well. And it wasn't just men, it was women as well. Particularly in England, you have, in England and in France, you have a lot of women who were using the system, attaching themselves to higher nobles to raise their own status, or taking roles in court as ladies in waiting and ladies of the chamber. So you've got a whole system, both men and women. So how does this work, and why, and why specifically, what's driving them doing it? And when we start looking at that, we're going to start looking at 3 different models for who the courtiers were and how they should behave. Before I get into that part, does anybody have questions about the great chain of being? Okay, so assuming we're okay, so we're going to go on. So we're going to, there was a lot of people who wrote about the courtier and who wrote about how to behave. There are several books that are also aimed at the prince or the king about how they should behave and how they should rule. What we're going to look at today is the models for the courtier, for who they were and how they should behave, and we're going to look at 3 different viewpoints. The first is going to be Castiglione. He is an Italian, and we talk and wrote a book that is probably the most well-known about the courtier, and we're going to talk about him and his views. We're also going to talk about Machiavelli, who most people are probably very familiar with. He is considered by most to be the father of modern politics, and we'll talk a little bit about his views and what he thought was happening. And then we're also going to talk about Christine de Pizan, and she is a French woman from the early 1400s, and she wrote a book that was specifically geared towards women about how the princess and the duchess and the countess should behave, but then goes on down the great chain of being, talking about the ladies of estate and the country estate, ladies of country estates, and how they should behave and what they should do. And her view kind of parallels Castiglione's to a point, but she has some different viewpoints as well. So a very important model that we're going to look at too. As part of this, we're also going to touch really briefly about some real life courtiers that give examples of what this person is doing. So we're going to start with Castiglione. And pardon me, my Italian is horrible, so I'm probably butchering that. Balthazar Castiglione was the book of the Courtier was printed in 1528. It takes place in around 1518. It is an account of a conversation that happens at the Duke of Urbino's estate. In the court, or in this particular case, it was the evening activities focusing around the Duchess of Urbino. There are quite a few people that are mentioned in the book. There are 8 main participants, I believe, if I remember correctly. But there are a lot of other people mentioned, a lot of other people who are present. So you have present there, you have Castiglione, who is a count himself. You have nobility, you have military men, you have a general, you have soldiers, you have artists, you have painters, you have ladies of the court who are also of noble lineage. And they were discussing about who the courtier was, how they should behave, and what they should do. The next class, we're going to focus a lot on those concepts of what skills they should have, what they should know, how should they behave, and what the benefit of and what the point of it was. But we're going to talk a little bit about the point now, and I'm going to read a quote from the book of the Courtier. The final end of the courtier, which to all his good conditions and honest qualities tend, is to become an instructor and teacher of his prince or lord, inclining him to virtuous practices, and to be frank and free with him after he is once in favor, in matters touching his honor and estimation, always putting him in mind to follow virtue and to flee vice, opening unto him the commodities of the one and inconveniences of the other, and to shut his ears against flatterers, which are the beginning of self-loving and all ignorance. And this is from the English translation. And we'll talk about that here too. So Castiglione was very popular in period. It was translated into a lot of different languages for several countries during our time period, including English. And Hovey was one of the ones who translated it. Now, if you are looking for the Anglified version of the Courtier, gearing it towards English readers and a late 16th century concept of the Courtier, then read Hobbes. And that's what we're going to use primarily when we start discussing the qualities. If you are looking for what Castiglione actually said and a very faithful translation, you're going to want to find a modern translation that has been translated, because the English in period, they really didn't, their idea of translation was getting the general idea, but if they took liberties and added concepts and modified concepts a little bit, that was okay. And he certainly did, Hovey certainly did. Still a really good rendition of what Castiglione thought, and very well done. I'm going to recommend it as people's first place to read, because the modern versions of it are very, very easy to read, and we're going to relate to those a little more than we will necessarily the very early 1500s Italian environment. So let's talk a little bit about Castiglione's quote. One of the things about Castiglione the man, and using him as an example of the courtier, who was a fine example, he is a count who has his own land. He is in fealty to the Duke of Urbino. And at least 3 times that we know, well, at least twice that I know of, the Duke of Urbino banished Castiglione for speaking his mind and telling him that he's doing things that he shouldn't be doing. At least once, Castiglione actively refused to do what the Duke asked of him, in telling him that it was beneath the Duke to order such things. So Castiglione had been banished, and during that time he did not talk ill of the Duke. He did not ever speak in his letters. He didn't speak ill of him at any point. In fact, we have several letters he wrote to him while he was banished, talking to him and telling him how much he admires him and how much he hopes his goodwill will come back towards him, and going on from there. And in both cases it did. The last one was the Duke needed help with the Pope, and Castiglione was sent as an ambassador of the Duke to the Pope, asking for the Pope's assistance. And the Pope kept refusing and kept refusing, told Castiglione to go home at one point and banished him. And then later, when the Pope needed help financially and militarily, he, of course, invited his good friend Castiglione back to talk to him to see if the Duke would be still willing to help him. And so sometimes, according to the courtier model from Castiglione, sometimes it is important to tell the prince that he's doing something wrong, and to make it clear that this is something that you can't do, which is going to be contrary to the next group that we're going to look at. So before we go on, does anybody have questions about the book of the Courtier, about Castiglione, about his models? So I can't see the chat. I have no idea if people are asking questions there. Unmute your mics now, and you can ask here. Okay, so we will go on. So this, and I forgot to show you my books, so we'll back up. This is the Elizabethan Worldview. It is where the information from it is where the information on the Great Chain of Being came from. It is a wonderful book about the philosophies of the Middle Ages and what the theories were going into the Renaissance, and how the Renaissance started changing. It is a classic textbook for the studies of Shakespeare, for Shakespearean studies. And it is a great little book. And if you're going to look at any type of philosophy involving the Middle Ages, or look at any of the for me, the historic fencing manuals, I'm going to greatly recommend that you take a look at this book because it comes into play in everything they do. You'll see it a lot referenced in some of the translations and interpretations of Fiore that are out there. So it is very important to understand where they were coming from mentally.
Philip, I'm sorry, excuse me, if I may.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you. Would you be willing to post that either in chat or elsewhere, wherever it's convenient for you, so that we can see the title and the author, please?
I certainly will. It should be in the bibliography that is in the class notes that are on
great. Thank you.
On the event page, but I'll post them afterwards as well.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. So the Book of the Courtier is this one right here. This is the English translation, which I adore. There are also several really good translations, and there is a translation of the English done, the one translated in English in period by Hobb. I believe it's Hobb. That is free on the internet, and the link to access that is in the class notes that is on the event page. Okay. And then the next one we're going to talk about is Nicolo Machiavelli and The Prince. Okay. So the Machiavelli, the book is talking a lot about the prince and how they should behave and rule, but along with it, he spends a lot of time talking about the people attending the prince and what your place and role in this is. And he viewed that he viewed that the clerks were the real power behind the man who is running the government, because although the king made decisions, the king couldn't implement the policies directly. He had to have intelligent, literate men to do that for him. And Machiavelli says this was the place where even a man of a poor status, such as a blacksmith's son, could come up in the world and make a name for himself by attaching himself to powerful men who needed their skills and advice. So the big point where he did, and where Castiglione is saying that the courtier is probably Armigerius and more of a noble character, Machiavelli is clearly saying no, it's anybody who's got the needed skills and tools. Machiavelli also has a very different viewpoint about how they should behave. All the power rests with the prince. There is no room for arguing with him. If the prince wants something done, it's your obligation and responsibility to do it if you want to continue having favor. And by doing it, maybe you can help him down the line and benefit other people down the line through tempering his mood. But you can only do that if if you are still there and still speaking. He is still speaking to you. I have a quote from the prince that I'd like to read. I actually have two. It is much safer to be feared than loved, because love is preserved by the link of obligation, which, owing to the business of men, is broken at every opportunity for their advantage. But fear preserves you by a dread punishment which never fails. The other quote is, how we live is so different from how we ought to live that he who studies what ought to be done rather than what is done will learn the way to his downfall rather than to his preservation. So Machiavelli says that, having your ideals are nice and you should adhere to them, but we got to be practical here. I don't really agree with Machiavelli, and I don't view what he is doing works in the long run. However, there are a lot of successful people using that model for the courtier, and as I said, he is viewed as the father of modern politics. So obviously some people think he is right and there's value in his viewpoint. But so he has a competing viewpoint of what's going on with the courtier. Still working the same ideals, they still have the same end, they still are getting the same benefits from it. It's just a different philosophy of how it works and why it works and what you should do and who is doing it. So Machiavelli is very important to look at in our studies, because he is, some people view him as the antithesis of Castiglione or it's his opposite, but in reality, it's just a competing mindset, in my opinion. And I'll give that disclaimer here. This is all my interpretations and my opinion of the period sources.
Philippe, this is Odette.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I think we got to keep in mind, in the case of, Castiglione is a noble, Machiavelli is tortured by the Medici. So, his viewpoints might be also skewed on the fact that he's not from the same class. He tried to raise there's some life things that Machiavelli does.
Oh, absolutely.
That kind of do that whole, it is better to be just, whether it's be better to fear or loved, best not to be hated, kind of thing is, yeah. So, I mean, he's trying to move that chain a little earlier than they do in like England, on where he is in the great chain of being.
Oh, absolutely. And he is correct in a lot of sense that the larger governments would not have happened, particularly in the late 16th century, without the massive amount of clerks and magistrates that were running it. And most of them were not armigerous, at least to start with, and most of them were not nobility. So you're absolutely right. And yeah, there are specifics about the man that he distrusted and did not particularly care for the nobility. But does anybody else have any questions or commentary? This is normally where I get a lot of people with conflicting, because normally you fall into one of the camps. You either really like Castiglione or you really like Machiavelli. Anyone else? Okay. I heard something.
Hi, Philippe.
Hey, how are you doing?
Not too bad. Hi, Millicent. I know you're lurking in there. I wanted to ask a few questions, but before I do, before everything shut down, I went to the university's library and I found Castiglione, and then I also found the English translation you're talking about. This was in the University of Illinois library, Hobie.
Okay. Yes.
For English. Yeah, so that was a really interesting read, looking at the differences between those two, like you said in the first class.
Yeah, and they're very different. I think he stays true to the model, but he puts a lot of his own comments and thoughts in there.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of that 16th century English xenophobia that creeps in. Yeah, sorry, I'm English, but anyway.
That's okay.
Well, yeah, kind of vibing on what Odette was touching on. I wonder what your, if you could elaborate on your opinion or whatever like that. This whole great chain of being, which you mentioned was sort of a dominant worldview previously. But then you also mentioned that at some point in time during the 16th century, and particularly by the end of the 16th century, that chain of being kind of theory or model for the universe has been largely sort of abandoned. Yeah, Machiavelli wasn't noble born, and he was also living in a republic in Florence rather than, at least by that point in time, there wasn't a hereditary noble lord like Castiglione had sitting in Urbino, although Urbino was part of the papal state. So yeah, no doubt that they still in Urbino and the court of Urbino really believed in that chain of being, seeing as how they were all, a vassal of the Pope, effectively.
Absolutely. So one of the models for Machiavelli that I like to use as a living as an example of a real person is Thomas Cromwell. He started from a blacksmith's son. He became a clerk to a bishop, and worked his way up following him, and then eventually became a minister under Henry VIII. And then ultimately came to a tragic end when he wasn't able to fulfill what the king wanted. So you've got an example there of someone who is coming up through the ranks. A similar piece, somebody of a similar class who follows the Castiglione model would be Leonardo da Vinci. You've got here somebody who is not nobility, who is through his skill as an artist, a painter, and dealing with military inventions, is attached himself to various courts and various people, ultimately to the King of France, and Francis gave him all sorts of lavish presents, and he lived in Francis's estate, and he basically took care of him because he was that type of a person. So you've got both types of people and using both models. And although Castiglione was focused on the nobility, even at the discussion that takes place with the courtier, not everyone there was noble. There was a painter there who was, although he was Armagarius, he was a lesser son. He had no access to titles. So you've got a variety of people using these models, not just the nobility, although Castiglione is very focused on the male nobles.
Okay. So basically, it's kind of so basically, you're kind of juxtapositioning Cromwell and Da Vinci,
yes.
both being non-nobles, but one, Cromwell, really trying to essentially jump himself up on that chain of being, i.e., he doesn't really believe in the chain of being anymore. Something a little more of a modern viewpoint, what we think of today as social mobility, I guess.
Yeah. Yes.
Whereas Da Vinci gained great renown and, I'm going to say basically wealth. I mean, maybe it wasn't money per se, but it was, a lot of stuff. He had a very comfortable life and such like that. But in your opinion, you think Da Vinci still really saw himself as still essentially on that same social rung, that he may have gained a lot of status and reputation, but he was still, quote, in his place on the chain of being.
Well, I don't think he thought he was an equal to the nobility. But I do think that the whole point of the courtier is they're trying to elevate themselves past their station,
Okay.
which is why the courtier really takes off in the 16th century, and as those bounds start slipping. If we go back to Cromwell, Cromwell was eventually given titles and given
Right.
and nobility. And one of the arguments that he had a lot when he was minister was that the nobles didn't like taking orders from him because they shouldn't have to. He is not a noble. They are above him socially. And the peasants didn't like taking orders from him because he wasn't a real noble. So what right did he have to tell them what to do? So he got a lot of flack on both sides from that, from definitely advancing from his station. But we see in latent period, we see a lot of people who may have been Armagarius but not noble gain titles such as knighthood, and who were not nobles gain knighthood from Elizabeth as thank yous. And there's a lot of people moving up in those areas.
Okay.
Hey, Philippe, this is Melisande. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So could we also include, you've talked about Thomas Cromwell as a counterpoise to Da Vinci. Can we also talk about Thomas More, who was also of that same clerk class, and yet very definitely, so here are two men, Thomas Cromwell and Thomas More, both in England, one of them following the Machiavelli model, but what don't you think that Thomas More followed the Castiglione model even up to the point of dying because he thought it was for his prince's benefit?
Yeah, Thomas More is one of those hybrids. He fits Machiavelli's clerk model very well. But yes, his philosophy and viewpoint, I would agree with you, was very much under the Castiglione model, including dying for his convictions, hoping that his king would would see what he thought was the truth.
Thanks.
All right, this is Odette again. Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
We're going to talk about backgrounds here. All right, Da Vinci is never going to see himself as equal with a courtier. He's a bastard. He's an illegitimate. He does not, that worldview is not going to change until probably the 20th century, right? Where people who are not born in wedlock can have some level of authority and legitimacy. Now, Cromwell is blacksmith's son. More is the knight's son. So he's already up that rank in a way that that Cromwell's not. I mean, this does all lay the groundwork for somebody to finally go, you know what, we can cut a king's head off. And they do that, obviously, in the mid 17th century in England. But I think we do really need to keep in mind where all these people started. But it was also much easier to topple Cromwell. And there was a lot of no sympathy for him when he fell. There was a lot of sympathy for More when he fell. Because
Absolutely.
More stayed in his lane, as it were.
Yes. No, absolutely. One of the things that we're talking about is when we're talking about layers of the courtiers, Cromwell didn't start as a courtier to the king. He started as a courtier to a priest, and then became I forget his title at this point, so I do apologize. And then the minister. So it was moving up in ranks, and he did a lot of social jumping. Was very ambitious, and depending on whose autobiography of him you read, very calculating in some respects. So no, I agree with you completely. And there was a lot of argument about the fact that he wasn't of nobility and was giving orders and thinking he was better than some of the nobility and his peers, his equals in society. So absolutely, you are absolutely correct in that. At the same time, Da Vinci was a bastard, but Da Vinci also was received in court with lavish gifts, sat at the side of the king on several occasions, much higher although I think it didn't go to his head. He never tried to take positions, ranks, or titles. He certainly was well above where he would have been in life had he not been a courtier to the king.
Right, but I don't think he'd ever gone and done the Cromwell route because of his origins. That's what I'm saying. That's why you're going to see him in the consigliere. Anyway. Yeah, he's going to stay in the other lane. And and I speak Italian. That's the problem.
Oh, yeah, I don't, and I butcher it regularly. Okay, I'm going to go on to my last model so we can get this in before the class is up. And this is Christine de Pizan. She is a French writer and a prolific writer. From the early 1400s, the book of The Treasure of the City of Ladies was published in 1405. This is a wonderful book, and I'm going to show it here. If you can read French, there's all sorts of free copies on the internet, but the only English translation I've been able to find is available from Dover, and it's like $10. I highly recommend this because it gives us yet a third model of who the courtiers were and what authority they had. And this is written specifically to women by a woman about women in the time period and the courtiers. So Castiglione has a little section in the back of his book about the female courtier. And it's basically, she should be educated, but not necessarily too educated, but she should be able to hold her own in conversation and in his viewpoint with the men. And that she should be able to play games and play chess, and that she should be able to play an instrument, and she should be able to dance. And when they started getting into all the physical activities and all of the education that the courtier should have under Castiglione's model, that's missing from his version of the female courtier. So over 100 years earlier, Christine de Pizan in France is writing a book about women's place in court. And it's most people only pay attention to the first section of the book, which is on how the princess should behave and how the duchess and the countesses should behave. And it mimics Castiglione's model almost to a T. They do advocate much more in the way of being politically savvy and in the way of education for the women. Christine de Pizan does warn the princess and the duchess at one point that although they may not be able to make any decisions, they can certainly be used to influence their husband. And it is important that they understand politics so that they do not get their husband into trouble inadvertently. But then she goes on. That's not where she stops. And the second half of the book talks about the lesser noble women, all the way down to the common woman. And she says they should follow everything that the princess should. She doesn't change any of that. But she says that it's even more important for the countess or the baroness out on a country estate to be well educated, because her husband's duty is to go to war with the king. And so he's going to leave at some point, and she will be at the mercy of men lesser than herself if she is not able to look at the books, be able to tell what's going on with the running of the estate. Christine Pizan specifically tells her that she must be able to wear harness, ride a horse, and lead men in battle, because her husband will be gone at some point, and she must lead the defenses to her estate or be at the mercy of a man who does. And specifically says that at that point she no longer will be in control. It will be men of lesser status telling her what's going to be done. She even advocates training women in those positions of would be armigerous and lesser nobility in combat, in personal combat, because they need to be able to do that. And as a side note, Saviolo is a fencing master in England in the late 1600s. In his book that he has, the second book is on honor and honorable duels. And he has a whole section on the nobility of women where he talks about women who have been known for battle, and not just defending their homelands, but personal battle. And when we get talking about the qualities of the courtiers and what they should be taught and do, we'll talk more specifically about some of the women that meet that model for Christine de Pizan. So one of the things I like about Christine de Pizan is if we use her model, then basically we're looking at the exact same model of Castiglione, only it applies to everybody, not just women. I mean, not just men and women in a small capacity. We now have expanded that model to apply to men and women all the way through, including the study of arms and combat and martial activity. Okay, does anybody have any comments? None? Okay. So
Honestly, I'm looking forward to exploring this further, and thank you for teaching us. It gives me something kind of new and exciting to play with and look at, and I'm excited about it.
I really like her works, and she was a prolific writer. She's got a lot of information on a lot of different subjects, including a really nice refutation of courtly love. So I really do like her as a model, including in this. And her viewpoint in her book is completely separate from the other two, because she's not dealing with the men at all. She's just dealing with the women and the female side.
I went ahead and pasted, this is Odette again, I pasted in the chat window the link to the Getty image of Christina Pizan presenting the book to Isabella of Bavaria, the Queen of France.
Excellent. And we'll put the title and the link to Amazon in Dover afterwards, so that so people can go and take a look at it. And if you can read French, there's all sorts of free copies of it on the internet, but not in English. Okay. So the next logical progression to this is going to be, what were the courtiers doing? What did they advocate about how to behave and what to do? So the philosophy just wasn't attach yourself to a prince. All of them had ways to do that. Machiavelli's is pretty straightforward. Castiglione's is rather involved, and he has a whole concept of how the courtier should what he should study, what arts and skills he should know, what he's able to do, how he should behave, both with his peers and with those of ranks above him, and how to best benefit, how to get the best benefit for himself and his prince from what he's doing. Christina Pizan's model mimics that fairly well. And so the next class we're going to talk about is those skills, what they should be doing, what they should be studying, why those particular skills are important, and where they fit in the social ordering and in social behavior. And then we'll also talk more about what type of education they were getting and how they should behave. And we're going to do that at a separate class. It's really too much to start getting into it in the first one. So this first one, I just wanted to talk about the different models and how and what a courtier is and how it and what they were doing. In the next class that I haven't scheduled yet, but I promise I will do that tomorrow, we'll talk about what they were doing, how they were doing it, and we'll also talk quite a bit about how that applies to the SCA and why it's important for the SCA. So does anybody have any questions about the class, or?
I have one question.
About 10 minutes to kill.
Okay. Philippe, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Particularly, maybe for anybody who's watching this and thinking about it in relation to their SCA persona, because I know I am.
Okay.
In your opinion, we talked a lot about in this class how this idea of the courtier, regardless of which model anybody is particularly following, whether Castiglione's or Machiavelli's or Christina Pizan's, that at core, it is all about trying to gain a little bit of social mobility, a little bit of increase of status and that sort of a thing. Is there any particular start to this idea of a courtier? When did this really sort of get started? I mean, by the time Castiglione is writing about it in about 1510, you said, is this already a very well-established tradition, or is this something that's new and it's starting to evolve at that time? Or when does this sort of courtier idea really get going, as opposed to maybe the earlier, just strictly feudal system of homage?
Okay, so that's a complicated question, and one that I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer, but I'll do the best I can on it. So the whole concept of the courtier been around for as long as they were kings, but initially it would have been the king's close companions, the lords that answered to him or swore fealty to him, and those that were doing the king's service. And as though that would be a small number and wouldn't have included a lot of the lower ranks except as periphery. If I was a baron attending the court of the king on business, I would bring my courtiers with me. So you may have some limited access, but not direct access early. In most cases, it was the people who were dealing with the king, who had a vested interest, either the landowners, particularly the nobility, and then you also are dealing with the people who are looking to the king for legal issues and legal matters. and that's going to happen anywhere where you had a court, all the way down to the barons and the lords and ladies, particularly early. And with the Italian city-state model, you've got thousands of courts, not just a few. So it would have existed all the way through. The difference is with Castiglione and them is they are formulating how to train them to be courtiers and how to teach them to be courtiers. Machiavelli is talking about what they need to know and how they should behave to get what you need from there. And we're also looking, it is not the beginning of personal gain, because when you have the king making legal decisions, the people who are trying to convince him to side with them are certainly looking to get personal gain there, whether it's just or not. So one of the things, but the Castiglione and Christine de Pizan and Machiavelli's big contribution is talking about how to do this and what type of education they should have. And it starts showing about the same time as you start seeing people other than the clergy starting into the university. So around the 1300s is what I'm going to guess, but that is an educated guess on my part. I would not. That is something that could certainly bear some further studying or a little research into other people's studies. But yes, I'm gonna. The university environments is where you see a lot of this happening very rapidly, because you've got a lot of people from, particularly in the 1500s and the 1600s, of different classes socializing, because a well-off merchant could afford to send his son to university and could be going to classes in the proximities of younger sons of nobility, or particularly lesser sons who are not going to inherit a title, who are looking to advance themselves through education. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that idea of the university being kind of a predecessor and a sort of a beginning to this, that I think makes a lot of sense.
Okay. One of the questions that came up in a previous class that we did 2 weeks ago was, we were talking about models, and we were talking about that a lot of the clerks and a lot of the artists are advancing themselves through their knowledge and their skills. It says, but were there any in the martial orders, were people advancing themselves based on their martial capacity and their ability to be good fighters? And at that time, I really didn't have a good answer for it, and it kind of smacked me in the face when we were looking at things, when I was looking at some research I'm doing for French historical combat, and that would be Cavacabo, who is a French fencing master at the very end of the 16th century. He's an Italian, not noble, who came to France to teach the then young king fencing. So he's advanced himself through his knowledge and through his martial capabilities. You also have Saviolo as a prime example of this. He wasn't a courtier to the king, but he was a courtier to several nobles who had access to the queen. So although he never had able to deal with the queen directly, as far as we know, he taught several nobles who did, and so he was a courtier in the classic Castiglione sense in that respect as well. I see nope, that's not it. Okay, is there any other questions? Any commentary? Any suggestions for future topics on this? A couple people have asked if I would do a class just on the Elizabethan world studies with world picture, with the Great Chain of Being and the Wheel of Fortune and some other concepts from medieval. Would there be interest in that?
Absolutely.
Yes.
So that's something I may try to get on the schedule too, while we still have a plethora of the online classes, which I am enjoying greatly. Please check the RUM website. There are a lot of classes that they are scheduling. I would like to thank the RUM staff for helping us figure out Zoom and getting everything together. You are all very helpful. And I would also like to just remind everyone to be safe, practice social distancing, and wash your hands, damn it. Okay. I'm all set and all done unless somebody has other questions or comments they would like to make. We're past the hour at this point, but I think we can still talk even if they're stopping the Facebook feed. So is there any other commentary or questions?
Just looking forward to the next part of this. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Anyone else?
And Philippe, this is Melisande. Can you hear me?
I can.
If anybody does come up with something, a comment or a question or an idea for another class after we're offline, like, you know, we think better after we don't have the opportunity to say it, we can email you. Is that right? So,
Absolutely.
so you want to give your email address?
So my email address is mandritta, MANDRITTA @yahoo.com. I'm also on Facebook as Philippe de Lyon, and you can reach me there. And if you can't if you can't find it or if you can't reach me, I'm also on the Rum community group, so you can search there and find me if you have trouble getting me any other way. So.
And I just typed your email in the text chat box, so if anybody needs it and doesn't have it, they can look at it there.
Okay. All right. You all have a safe night, and I will talk to you all more very soon.